Well, hello there, and welcome once again to another episode of this podcast channel of the Awakened Path. Thank you for being here, and thank you for following. Thank you for your comments, for your love, and for being a part of this community. Today, I have a very special question for you, and that question is, how do you take care of yourself? And what happens if and when you don't? Now, there's so much more to be said about this, about what shaped your values growing up, about understanding the difference between socialization, between conditioning, and between inner judgment. And last but not least, getting a deep insight into which authority are you allowing to be guiding your life? An outside authority or an inside authority? If this piques your interest, then stay right here because we're going to dive right in. Before we do, go now and subscribe to this channel so that every time I upload a new video, you get notified. Thank you. Okay, let's dive right in. About self-discipline, sometimes it's completely misunderstood because when I say self-discipline, what comes to your mind? I'm sure that what comes to your mind is some harshness, some toughness, some uncomfortableness about limitations and boundaries and rules and regulations, when instead what I want to bring to your attention is everything but that. Because the issue with self-discipline is that when we have discipline in our lives bloom and there's room for fun and joy and abundance. The first thing I want to have a conversation about is about what is your understanding of what self-discipline is. Many of us interpret self-discipline as putting certain goals in our lives and being strict about how we go about fulfilling those goals. And they could be things like, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to start dieting in a certain way, I'm going to do a diet, or I'm going to do a detox, or I'm going to start meditating every day, or I'm going to start going to the gym every day, or I'm going to start weightlifting now. I'm going to put more order in my house. I'm going to keep my studio ordered. I'm going to do my homework when I get home, or I'm going to study more, or any of those things that sound like self-discipline. And here are the insights that I want to bring to your attention. Self-discipline. Yes, it is about doing those things that we commit to do for ourselves, but we don't do it, we cannot do it when those ideas of what self-discipline looks like, A, are not aligned with our values, the values that shaped ourselves as we were growing up, and B, they're not aligned with our inner authority, what we know to be our truth, or should I say, what we don't know to be our inner truth, because we have been so conditioned by outside authorities telling us smoking is not good for you. If you don't study, you will fail at university. If you don't keep a room in order, then you won't work comfortably. If you don't exercise more, your bones will lose density, or whatever it is that those outside authorities are telling you. And herein comes one important aspect I invite you to think about. And that is the difference between socialization, conditioning, and inner self-judgment. Socialization, that happens to the best of us. And it happens because different cultures, different countries, different places around the world, we have different ways of doing things. Many of these ways have to do with the fact that when you grow up in a tropical climate, for example, then you have an inner tempo, a timing about the way in which you do things that is much slower than in other places of the world where the temperatures are lower. And that's because a lot of heat, literally, physically, in reality, doesn't let our bodies do things in a hurry. Because if we sweat too much, it could be dangerous for us. So we tend to, when we're in a hot weather, we tend to do things slowly. Think about when you go on vacation to a high humidity, very warm climate. What naturally happens to you? You slow down, don't you? So that would be a socialization, how things are done, in what speed. You go to New York, if you've been there, if you've visited there, or if you've watched a movie of New York, you will notice that holy crap, things happen so fast. I remember when I was young and my first time in New York, I was probably 27, and I go to one of those carts that serve coffee on the street, and I stand in front of the window and say, I would like a coffee. And of course, I had no idea. I'm talking 33 years ago, and that was my second time to the US, the first one being when I was 16. So I had no idea the myriad of offerings that they had in coffee and how that worked. So I was just lifting my eyes to read behind the lady at the cashier to read what options and offerings of coffee there were. And she's like, what kind, honey? And because I took a split second to answer, she says, can you move to the side next? And I was so shocked. And so while I was there standing on the side with this shock in my face, I kind of read the offerings and I'm like, yeah, I want, an Americano, whatever. And then as soon as that person stopped, I'm like, I'm ready. And she's like, okay, honey, what do you want? Oh my goodness. Speak about socialization being different than where I was coming from. I was coming from Argentina, where I lived and where I was born and raised until I was 27, as a matter of fact, where socialization means to sit around a table of good food and stay after the meal drinking coffee and chatting, sometimes until late afternoon. So you have lunch and then you have dinner and you never got up from the table. Speak about different timings of socialization. So you get the point of what I'm saying. Socialization has to do with our cultures, our norms, the way in which we do things, because that's what that society does. Now, conditioning is very different. Conditioning has to do with the influences that first your family between 0 and 7 years of age, and then school had on you, telling you what was expected from you, giving you cues that you internalized, by which you created a persona that says, if I do this in this way, I will be loved and accepted. And if I do things in this other way, I will be rejected and or ostracized. So through those outside cues that were given, sometimes in an unconscious way, sometimes your parents just would say things like, what a good girl. She learned to read so early on before school even started. And it made you believe that if you were ahead of the curve, then you will be loved. And probably that led into a life of you thriving and striving to really be ahead of the curve and beating and berating yourself if you weren't able to, for example. So conditioning has to do with those cues that were given to us consciously and unconsciously, through which we created a series of personas to fit within those outside cues. They conditioned us to do and be who we thought the outside world wanted us to be and do. Now that's kind of rough, isn't it? So we all get to a point in our lives where we're like, I'm so sick and tired of this, because no matter how hard you try, that love never comes. Because here's the insight, it'll never come from outside, it'll come from inside, which I'm sure you already know. Which leads to the last one, which is the internalized self-judgment. For most of us growing up, we internalize those voices of the outside conditioning. We internalize those judgments that come from our parents, from our teachers, from our friends that have bullied us. And we internalize those words of why we are not good enough, why we are not worthy, because we look the wrong way, because we don't fit the way in which we are simply in the environment where we exist, and because of many other things that have been told us and that we've internalized and keep repeating inside over and over and judging ourselves for being who we are. There is a difference between socialization, conditioning, and self judgment. They are a bit related, but not completely. But it's very important to understand once again that these values that shaped you growing up have to do with all these three things. So there's cultures where hugging when you arrive and kissing each other is needed and wanted and welcomed, and there's cultures where don't even touch me. For example, England. In England is far away culture. Italy, Argentina is come and kiss me and give me a hug. America, you give a hug to a stranger if it's a friend of a friend, no big deal. So these are things that create our value system. And then we have, once again, the self discipline, which affects how we live. On a daily basis, we are given a certain quota of willpower. Willpower is not in infinite supply. On the contrary, it's a finite daily amount. And when we use it early on in the day, then we're left with none for the end of the day. And if we try to use self discipline as a result of grit, of push pull, and of willpower, we will always fall short. So here's the thing, I work with women who struggle with the relationship with their bodies. They struggle because either they have this dysmorphed vision of who they are and they're almost anorexic because they've created this dysfunction through the internalization of all these self values and this rejection and this idea that they have to be extra skinny to fit in. Or the other way around, where they're overweight and they cannot release those extra kilos or pounds because there is such an ingrained pain and trauma that is needed to keep them safe in those extra layers of fat that they cannot release that weight. Or, for example, with people that want to let go of smoking, but they cannot do it. They do it, they do it, they do it, and suddenly they just have to have that cigarette. And that's because that self discipline is not coming truly from inside of themselves. Are you listening? Because I'm about to give you an enormous jewel. This is a golden nugget about this conversation. I love the way human design describes this so interestingly. In human design, we speak about authority. What is your authority? And we all have different authority types. And the authority is, in this case, the way in which we make decisions, the way in which we filter our understanding of where we want to give our energy to and where we don't want to give our energy to. And there's many ways that are different ways in which each one of us have a particular ingrained, wired, manual of operations way of tapping into what that inner authority is. And that authority has to do with, are we a person that feels it in our gut? Are we a person that instinctively in a second we know what that yes or that no is? Are we someone that has to move through a wave of emotions to finally figure it out? At the end of a period of time, are we a person that has to listen very, very softly to what's that budding flower inside at the center of our being, at the core of our being, that wants to say yes or no? There's many, many ways that are our inner authority. Here's the gem. Authority also comes from outside. What did the priest in your church tell you? What did the rabbi tell you? What did your father tell you? What did your mother tell you? What did your teacher tell you? What did the doctor tell you? What did your boyfriend, your husband, your kids? All of these are outside authorities. So, for example, you've internalized that smoking is bad for you. But truthfully, at this time of your life, you're going through a myriad of stressors. A lot is happening. You're struggling with a lot of things. And your inner authority is saying, yeah, I know I do eventually want to stop smoking, but right now may not be the right moment for me to focus the energy needed for me to stop smoking right now. Maybe right now I'm better off doing something different. What is your inner authority telling you? Maybe it's telling you to watch, to go slower, to observe what happens when you smoke that cigarette. When you smoke it, do you get that peaceful moment? Do you get that full recharge of energy that allows you to tackle what's next in your life during the day? So, okay, if that's your inner authority, honor that inner authority. And I'm using this very tricky example on purpose because it's an example where almost everybody nowadays in the world agrees that smoking is not good for you. And what I'm saying is, granted, it may not be good for you. However, given what's going on in your life, is this the right moment to stop smoking? That's where you have to discern if you've acquired a rule that is coming from outside that is saying that you have to stop smoking. And that is why your self discipline is not working because it's not a choice you're making from inside. You are trying to live up to some outside idea of what is the right thing to do. And until you move through that external and internal authority and you can understand that this is your choice, this is what you want to do, you won't be able to hold to that self discipline. On the other hand, you can ask yourself, well, what happens to me when I do smoke a cigarette? Do I feel better? Do I feel better while I'm smoking it, but then I feel really bad? Maybe you're asthmatic. Maybe you have issues in your lungs. Balance those things out, but make sure when you decide that that choice is coming from inside. Well, let's put this into a very broad aspect that is almost touching everybody, at least in the United States, but somehow around the world, in the Western world, which is overweight. The same question is true. Are you tackling the idea of releasing overweight because there's an outside authority saying that you need to look a certain way and you need to weigh a certain number? Or are you doing it because you know that you're uncomfortable in that body, that you want to feel more embodied, that you want to realize and understand what is happening for you, and you want to tackle that? And that comes from inside of you. And when it comes from inside of you, not only will it be important for you to understand what that self discipline looks like, but to also understand what drove the drive to overeat in the first place, or what is driving some compulsion and some compulsory behaviors at times where you want the self discipline, you do everything it takes to do the things right, and you use your willpower and your grit because, for the most part, it's coming from an internalized outside authority. And then at the end of the day, when you're exhausted, boom, everything crumbles and you're in a loop of frustration. So it is fundamental that you look inside of yourself and that you seek that inner authority. Where is that decision making coming from? And one last point of caveat is making sure that is coming from the right way in which you make decisions. And for that, you may want to have a human design reading. You may want to understand better how you operate, how you're wired, what is your manual of operations. But in any case, you can tune into that and figure that out. I would love to hear from you. This is one of those topics where I can preach all day, but unless there's some feedback, there's no way I can know if this is landing correctly, if this is how you're feeling, or if this is giving you some ahas that will really, really transform the way in which you go about these choices and about the understanding of your own self discipline. And I guarantee you that the more aspects of your life you can self discipline, if you can discipline your calendar, knowing that your morning is always going to be a certain way. You wake up, you meditate, you have a morning ritual, you have a certain type of breakfast. That liberates your quantity of willpower to be used. That's already decided. You don't need to make decisions. Brendan Bouchard once said at an event I was that if you dress the same way every day, it'll take away a lot of decision making. And I thought he was crazy at the time until I came back home and I realized that actually I do have the same dress code every day. I have like four pants that are black, and I have like 7 or 10 long tees of different colors, and I have 4 or 5 sweaters that are different colors but they're kind of the same. And I literally every morning go like, what is the color I want to wear today? And I go like 1, 2, 3, and it's always the same. And I realized, oh wow, I'm already doing that. So notice how that happens in your life. How is your life structured? How much planning ahead can you do to allow for the open spaces to be filled with joy, with adventure, with fun, and with the flow of the universe? I'm not saying your whole day has to be structured and planned. I'm saying that there's certain things in your day that you can plan and structure so that in those open spaces of the day, there's room for beauty. Is this landing with you? I really hope it does. For a morning ritual, go to my website, theawakenpath.com, and download the handout on how to create a morning ritual. It's not just about meditation, it's about having things that nourish your mind, your soul, your body. It's a lot bigger. And that handout, I'm sure, will help you. And by all means, if you haven't done it yet, subscribe to this channel, keep coming back, give me your feedback. Thank you for being a part of this tribe. Lots of love.